Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. Before sunrise, the overlook is a cut of dark against darker dark. My Camry clicks as it cools. The GPS glows in the cup holder, a soft square of blue that reads, "Haven, you have arrived." Wind climbs the slope and finds the seams of my coat, pine and cold metal. At the railing, a man stands with his back to me, a brown sweater smudged at the elbows, white hair caught by the breeze. He does not turn. He says it like he has been practicing it for years. "You are late." Yesterday, the house breathed around me like an empty shell. Portland rain dotted the kitchen window. I stood with a mug in my hand, coffee gone cold because I forgot to drink it. The radio shuffled through static and old ads. The sink dripped 3 seconds apart, regular as a metronome. When I slid behind the wheel that afternoon to go buy paper towels and milk, I poked at buttons I had never used. The navigation menu opened and there it was. A single saved address, Haven. My finger hovered. The room looked even more silent, reflected in the windshield. I tapped start. The ping was small, a bright needle of sound in the quiet. That word stayed on the screen after I turned the car off, a tiny promise that did not explain itself. The Camry used to belong to Jess Rivera's mother, Lila. I picked it up 3 months ago in a parking lot outside the credit union. Jess hugged me in that brisk way of people who are holding back something heavy. She smelled faintly of talc and mandarins. The car smelled like a woman who wore one perfume her whole life and never ran out of it. We signed the papers on the hood. Keys changed hands. Jess said, "Mom babied this car. Take it where you need to go." I said, "Thank you." I did not say I did not know where that was. This morning I filled a thermos like I used to when there were road trips and someone sleeping in the passenger seat. I locked the door and listened to the empty click echo once down the hall. When I turned the engine over, the check engine light blinked on, then off, like a small animal opening its eye and deciding to keep sleeping. I backed out anyway. Highway 26 took me east. Asphalt ribboned through fir and cedar, wet and dark. A song floated in and out through the static, a man promising to stand by someone, his voice warped by hills. Trucks through mist. The thermos rattled against the plastic holder, a little heartbeat that kept me company. I passed a gas station with one pump bagged, a grocery with a wind-torn banner for peaches. Farther out, the road narrowed and climbed hairpins tight to the land. Rockfall signs leaned under moss. The air thinned. Each mile felt like stepping off a map I knew by heart. The lot at Coyote Ridge is nothing more than packed dirt and a wooden gate where the forest opens its ribs. No other cars. I killed the engine. Silence came down in one piece. I could hear the needles hiss. I could hear my breath. He was there, a fixed point. The old man at the railing looked like a marker the mountain had placed to make sure the sky did not run away. He took a breath that shook, the kind of breath that goes down the wrong path and finds a cough. It came up dry and small. He pressed a handkerchief to his mouth, a square of white that stayed white. He braced his hand on the rail like he knew the grain of it, like he had tested every splinter. I came up beside him, not too close yet. The view dropped and then kept dropping. Valleys and layers, the blue kind of blue that makes your eyes water. The cold found the seams of my gloves and worked its way in. The thermos in my bag burned a warm spot against my hip. I said hi. My voice sounded like a stranger's voice. He turned then slow enough that I could count how long it took. His eyes were the color of river stones washed down to something honest, wet at the edges. He looked at me and then at the car and then at me again. "I thought no one would find it," he said. His voice was a porch step worn in the middle. "Find what exactly?" I said. He looked past me at the Camry, at the blue GPS glow. He smiled just the corner, a movement so careful I almost missed it. The message. He swallowed and tried again. The message she left. Who, I said. He touched the rail, thumb rubbing a track in the damp wood. "Lila," he said, and the name lifted in the wind like a bird that knew the way home. He nodded toward my car. "You have her car. If you drove it to this exact spot, then she remembered me to the very end." The wind rose and made the trees answer. Somewhere in the brush, a jay scolded us sharp and blue. My grip on the thermos tightened until my knuckles ached. The lid hissed a little when I turned it, steam fogging my glasses for a breath and then clearing. He watched the steam the way you watch breath in winter to make sure it is still there. I poured a little into the cap and held it out. His hand shook once when he reached. His fingers were thin ligaments stitched under skin. He cupped the heat and did not drink at first. He held it up to his face and let it warm his nose. He said, "Do you know why she saved that word? Haven." "No," I said. "I just found it. I almost deleted it." He laughed softly, a sound with no teeth in it. "Thank you for pressing go instead." He tapped the rail twice with 2 knuckles, a habit, a private signal. He turned back to the view and set the cap on the rail between us. He did not look at me when he spoke next. "I used to meet her here when we were young. We thought we had time." My tongue stayed still. The pine smell pressed at my throat. Somewhere down the mountain, a truck braked a long sigh. The GPS screen inside the car did not time out. Haven stayed lit like a small window that refused to go dark. He cleared his throat, a tiny cough that folded him for a heartbeat. He straightened with a hand flat on the wood. He said, "You came so I can say it out loud and not scare the trees." "Tell me," I said. He lifted his gaze to mine and did not look away. "If you brought this car here, then Lila kept her promise. She told me someone would come." He picked up the cap at last and drank. The heat put color back into his lips. He exhaled and set the cup down with care. His eyes were wet and grateful and a little afraid. "You must be the one who can listen." I looked down at the Camry, at the condensation that had traced a small heart against the inside of the windshield without my help. I looked back at him. The wind carried our breath away in pale threads. My fingers tightened around the thermos until the steel went cold to the touch. I said, "Start with her name." He nodded. He said it like a prayer. "Lila." The trees hissed again and the GPS kept shining. "Haven, Haven, Haven." He lifted one hand and placed it flat on the rail, palm to the grain, like pressing memory into wood. Then he looked at me and said, "You brought her here even after she was gone." And then he said, "She wanted you to tell me. She wanted you to tell me." The wind lifted the word and set it back down between us. I kept my hand on the thermos and nodded once. "Tell me," I said. We stood shoulder to shoulder. He did not hurry. He looked over the rail as if the valley itself held dates and names and those tight knots people carry around for decades. When he spoke again, the voice had a younger line to it, a riverbed showing through low water. "She lived 2 houses over from mine in Hood River," he said. "Her father owned the orchard. We picked for him some years when money was thin. She used to braid her hair and tuck the end under her collar when the wind kicked up." He smiled at the memory like a bruise you still press. "First time I talked to her was by the irrigation ditch. She threw me an apple and said I worked too slow. I threw it back and said she looked like trouble." He took a small breath and let it out through his nose. The forest filled the silence with a sound like rain that had not started yet. "We were 16 when I knew," he said. "Knew in that way that does not need witness. I bought a second-hand motorcycle that coughed more than it ran. We fixed it together behind the shed with a butter knife and a prayer." He glanced at my hands and then at his sled, his thumb over the rail as if wiping grease. "Our first ride up here," he said, "the headlight was dim and the seat foam was coming through the vinyl. Her arms around me, her chin on my shoulder. The sky felt close enough to put your hand in. She said, 'This is ours.' She claimed the ridge like saying grace." He fell quiet. In my peripheral vision, the thermos lid sent up a thin thread of steam. A jay flashed and was gone. Then the kitchen table scene. He did not say those words, but I could see it in the way he squared his shoulders. My father had his cap in his hands, he said. Her father put the lease on the table, said he would pull it if I kept coming by their place. Said there were other girls. Said people like us survive by minding our place. My mother looked at me and did not say anything at all. He tapped his knuckles once, the habit again. The wind paused as if the mountain listened for what he would choose. I said I would stop seeing her, he said. He looked at me without apology, only the plain shape of something true. I lasted 8 days. On the 9th, she came to the field, dirt on her knees from cutting through rows. She said she could not eat. She said she could not sleep. She said if I did not come to the ridge that night, she would come find me. Then she laughed because she already had. He smiled, and the years did not matter for a heartbeat. We stole time for 2 years, he said. We met at the back of the drive-in and left before the end so no one saw us together. We took turns bringing coffee that tasted like pennies. We hid Polaroids in a book of Psalms in the church library because no one borrowed it. She learned to tie a scarf over her hair so no one recognized her from far away. I kept a ring from a gumball machine in my pocket like a joke that was not a joke. We were careful. He closed his eyes, not careful enough. His eyelids crinkled as if from sun that was not there. Her brother followed us one afternoon, he said. I did not see him. He told their father. The next morning I watched their car turn out of the road from the orchard, and it did not come back. He swallowed throat tight enough that the word barely cleared. They sent her to an aunt in Salem. Her father told the sheriff I was a problem, and the sheriff told me he would find a reason if I gave him one. Envelopes came back unopened. I stood in front of a door in a different city, and an uncle with a shotgun told me to walk. I walked. The trees made a noise like paper torn slow. He kept his eyes on the horizon. You asked me why Haven, he said, because this was the one place where nobody told us we could not. After she left, I kept coming anyway, not because I thought she would be here, because I did not know where else to put the wanting. His hand found the rail again. The skin over his knuckles was thin and shiny. He cleared his throat and coughed once, a dry bark. He tried to swallow back. The handkerchief flashed white and went away. I poured a little more coffee without asking. He wrapped both hands around the cap. 6 months ago, I heard an engine up the grade, he said. People come through sometimes with cameras and dogs. I did not look until the door shut. Then I knew the sound of that door. The car was the same color as her hair had turned. He did not look at me then. He looked at the dirt by his boots. She got out slow, he said, but her smile did not. My mouth said, "You are late?" I did not plan that. It just came out. My hands had gone still. The thermos pressed a warm circle into my palm. What did she say? I asked. She said I would have waited anyway, he said. Then she said my name as if there had not been a year in between. We sat where you and I are standing. We did not waste time asking why. Sundays, always Sundays. All through the fall and winter. She liked to stand until the cold made her hands ache, and then she would take the cap from me and hold it without drinking. Some days she had more breath, some days less. The best were the days when the fog stayed low and we were the only things above it. He breathed out and his face softened into something like weariness and like joy. Her daughter drove her the last time, he said. She waited in the car and let us have an hour. We did not talk that day. We knew what day it was. He lifted the cap, sipped, and set it down again with the care of a ritual. Before she left, she told me she had saved this address in the car. She said she wanted me to be told by a stranger who felt familiar. I told her that sounded like her. Jess, I said. The word felt careful. She gave me the car 3 months ago. I did not know what was in it. He nodded without surprise. Jess is kind. She liked that her mother lit other people up. She did not like that it hurt, but she let it happen anyway. We stood like that a while longer, our coats tugged by the same wind. The blue GPS square still glowed inside the car. The word would not go away until I told it to, Haven. When my fingers stiffened, I opened my bag and made a space at the bottom for the thermos. "Do you come every Sunday?" I asked. He smiled with only one side of his mouth. "I was going to come anyway," he said. He glanced at me. "You can come or not. It is not a rule." He touched the rail again. "It is a place that holds." On the drive home, the radio found a station with fewer holes in it. The singer from earlier was back with the same promise in a cleaner voice. I did not look for meaning. The check engine light stayed asleep. At a stoplight, I realized my shoulders were not up around my ears. In the kitchen, the house was the same size it had been for months, but it did not press. I cleaned the thermos and left it open to dry the lid set beside it like a moon. The next Sunday, I woke before my alarm. Fog on the street made the neighborhood look soft. I filled the thermos and tucked 2 granola bars into my pocket, the good ones with almonds that break clean. The GPS was already on when I slid in. Haven sat bright on its screen. When I pressed the button, the ping sounded like a drop of water in a deep well. He was there when I pulled in. The same sweater. He turned before I shut the door, smiled like we had agreed to arrive at the same time, and did not talk about it. I lifted the thermos and he lifted his hand as if to say yes to the whole idea. We did what people do when they do not know the shape of what they are making. We shared the cap and stood quiet. We said things that sounded small and were not. He told me about a job he kept for 20 years that never once paid on time but always paid in full. I told him about a recipe my husband used to make on cold nights with too much oregano, and how I ate it anyway. He said Lila liked to sit with bare knees on cold boards. I said my daughter sends me photos of places I will not go, and I save them anyway. We did not correct each other. We let the sentences lie down between us and breathe. At home in the afternoon, Jess knocked on my door with a paper sack of oranges. I almost said I had just bought oranges, then I saw her face and moved aside. She put the bag on the counter and went to the sink like she knew the kitchen. She rinsed one and split it with her thumbs. The room filled with that hopeful smell, bright and clean. She handed me half. "You are driving Mom's car," she said. "It suits you." I said, "It has a sound like she's still in it." Jess smiled without showing teeth. "That sounds right," she said. Mom wore one perfume and never changed her mind. She looked toward the hallway as if the smell might be coming from there. "Have you found anything odd in it?" she asked. Her voice tried for casual and missed. "Only that you saved a word instead of an address," I said. "She did that," Jess said softly. "The word matters more than the root." She glanced at me, decided something, and nodded. "I know where you have been on Sundays. I am not checking up. I just want to say that if you see him, tell him I am glad he did not have to hear it from a voicemail." I held the peel while she spoke the white pith soft under my thumb. "Who is he to you?" I asked. To me, nothing and everything she said. The reason I grew up with a mother who looked out the window a certain way. The reason I learned that love and marriage do not always share a room. The reason I know she did the best she could with the time she had. She wiped her hands on a towel and stood by the counter as if waiting for the next thing. "There is something else," she said. "Mom gave me a box before the hospital got serious. She said to give it to him when it felt right. I did not know what right was until I saw your car in the lot at the Overlook last week. I followed you up the road and then turned around when I saw the ridge. I felt like I would be walking into someone else's memory." She looked down at her hands. "Do you think you could take it to him?" I could. I said it like a simple thing. She reached into the big canvas tote on her shoulder and brought out a wooden box the size of a paperback. The lid was carved with a pattern that looked like pine scales and river water mixed. She set it on the table. It smelled faintly of something floral that had been closed a long time. I did not open it. Her eyes tracked my hands and then lifted to my face. "I will take it up next Sunday," I said. She nodded and let the breath out through her cheeks. "Thank you," she said. For the car, for the ridge, for not pretending none of it happened. Sunday was bluer than the one before. The mountain sat closer. Hank saw the box at once and put his hand on the lid, almost a blessing. He did not open it either. He stood with his hand there until his fingers warmed the wood. She kept things simple when she could, he said. He lifted the lid with 2 hands and set it in the crook of his arm. Inside on top lay a folded sheet of paper, cream thick, the kind that makes a noise when you ease it open. There was no jewelry, no photo, just the letter. He did not pick it up at first. He traced the folded edge with 1 finger. My eyes stayed on the valley so the moment could be his. He breathed in and out and let the paper be what it was. Then he lifted it and turned it in his hands so we could both read the first line. The ink had bled a little into the fibers. The curve of her L was smooth and sure. To the one standing with Hank, to the one standing with Hank. The paper had weight, the kind you hear when you open it. The ink was blue that had slid a little into the fibers. A faint scent rose when he lifted the fold, something like lavender in old drawers. He held the letter so we both could see. His hands were steady in a way the rest of him was not. He did not rush the first lines. His eyes moved the way people read names on stones. Hank, it began, and then a line that was for him alone. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. When he opened them, he angled the page. The next sentence was plainer written across to whoever might be beside him. If you are here, you are the right one to hear this. Wynne touched the paper and made a small flag of it. He cupped it with his palm. He read more quiet until a sentence landed that he spoke aloud. Haven is not a spot on a map. Haven is the person who will stand with you when the air is thin. He went silent again. A jay called and moved deeper into the firs. He turned another fold and let out a breath that shook only at the end. You do not have to love me less to love someone now, he read. Give yourself permission to be happy. Then his mouth softened and he finished without sound. He set the letter back in the box like you set down a sleeping child. He rested his hands on the lid and kept them there. He did not look at me right away. The ridge opened out like it always did, indifferent and full. A thin cloud dragged a line across the far slope. The thermos was warm against my ribs. I said, "Did she say my name?" It came out half a joke. It came out more care than I meant to let show. He smiled without showing teeth. No names, he said. Only the shape of a person who listens. He shifted his weight and faced me. His eyes were wet and clear. Thank you for being that shape. We stood with that for a while. His breath made small ghosts in the cold that winked away fast. I could hear the small ticks of the car cooling in the lot. The GPS screen still glowed blue inside. Haven. Haven. He touched the box with 2 fingers. She made me promise to live after he said. It felt like a trick at first. Now it feels like a door that opens inward. He cleared his throat and looked down a small cough that went nowhere. Then he looked up again. Can I ask you something? He waited until I nodded. When you drive up, do you feel less alone by the time you park? I did not answer right away. I thought of the way the thermos rattled like a heartbeat. I thought of the song on the radio finding a station where the words made sense. I thought of the way his back had looked the first day, as if the mountain had placed him there so the sky would not run. Yes, I said. He nodded once like we had confirmed a measurement. When he reached for me, he did it in a way that let me step away if I chose. He was careful with touch. His hands were warm from holding the cap. He placed his fingers over mine where they gripped the rail not tight just there, as if adding a weight to keep me from lifting. I turned toward him. He leaned in and our foreheads met first. The kiss was small and unhurried. He tasted faintly of peppermint from a tin in his pocket. The wind pressed against us and then let go. We did not speak for a while after. We stood with our shoulders touching, watching a hawk slide a curve across the open air. When my toes went numb inside my boots, I poured the last of the coffee and we took turns finishing it. The cap clicked back into place with a sound that felt like a line drawn at the end of a paragraph. In the city, our days did not change, and they did. He called once during the week. His voice was lighter than before. He asked if the farmers' market still set up on Saturdays by the river. We met there and walked between stalls. Rain came thin and steady. We picked up paper cups of chowder and sat on a low wall. He told me about a mill job he held, how the machines were louder than thought, and how you learned to have thoughts under it anyway. I told him about a classroom I had once worked in, how the heat clanged in winter, and the children wore their coats until their fingers thawed. We did not tell each other what we were making of this. We let the walking and the chowder and the rain do that. Another day, we stood in front of the theater board reading the titles out loud. He said he liked westerns where the towns were too small for the trouble they got. I said I liked films where the sound seemed to come through cloth. We chose one about a singer from a long time ago and sat in the dark. He fell asleep for 10 minutes with his arms folded and woke with a start and looked embarrassed. I put my hand on his elbow and he stopped apologizing. We did dishes in my kitchen once after a simple meal. He moved like someone who had lived alone a long time, dried the bowls thoroughly, stacked the plates with the pattern facing the same way. He did not comment on my unpaired mugs. I did not move them for him. He told me a story about Lila that was not a wound. She once tried to bake bread without salt, he said. She pretended it was on purpose and called it a lesson. He smiled with the whole of his face, and then the smile faded but did not go missing. He put the towel down and turned toward me and took my face in his hands. We stood like that until the faucet dripped twice. He kissed me again, and it was softer than the first time and more sure. He came to the Ridge each Sunday with the same sweater and a new patience. We made the Ridge ours without taking anything from what it had been. Some mornings fog filled the valley and made a white sheet under our feet. Some mornings you could see all the way to a line of snow that cut the sky. He brought a small tin of mints and a pocket knife that had been his father's. I brought granola bars and a thermos that sometimes held tea instead of coffee. We stood. We spoke. We kept our words simple even when they were heavy. He started to bring things to my house in a slow trickle that said he was not testing me, but testing the air. A stack of worn paperbacks that smelled of a framed photo of a boy who looked like him but was not, because it was him at 20. A jar of screws sorted by size because it made him feel useful to keep small things from rolling away. He put a shaving kit on the edge of my sink and looked at it like it might walk off if he turned his back. It did not. The next morning it was where he had left it, and he smiled as if something had passed a test. We did not declare anything. We put 2 toothbrushes in 1 cup and went on with our breakfast. He made coffee too strong, and I watered mine from the kettle, and he pretended not to see. He asked where I kept the spare light bulbs and made a face when he found them next to the cereal. He moved them to a higher shelf and did not say a word about it. We learned the sound of each other's footsteps in the hall. There were pauses in our days that were not there before. Times when he would stop mid-sentence and listen to his chest the way you listen to weather. The cough came back in small drafts, a dry sound that took a moment to clear. He kept a handkerchief in his pocket folded into a square. Sometimes it stayed white, sometimes it did not. The first time I saw the red freckle the size of a seed, I went very still. He looked at the cloth, then folded it with care and put it away. We let silence hold for a count of 5 and then moved on. Not because it was nothing, because it was too much to hold in the middle of the kitchen. I told myself people cough in winter. I told myself he was nearly 80 and lungs get tired. I told myself what you tell yourself when you need both hands for the small work of being alive. On a Tuesday, a number I did not recognize lit my phone. The name on the screen belonged to the clinic where he had gone last week for tests he had not wanted. He was beside me, rinsing apple sleeves pushed to the elbow, water running warm and clear over his knuckles. I felt the vibration through the counter and through the part of me that listens for trouble. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and picked up. The call came from a voice that had said my name twice before speaking plain. "We have results. Can you come in this afternoon?" The exam room held the kind of light that makes everything look ironed flat. A poster of a healthy lung hung beside a vent that hummed. The doctor's coat lifted at the shoulders when he sat. He kept his hands visible on the desk. He spoke in parts the way you set a heavy thing down so it does not crack the wood. Advanced lung cancer, he said. He named the lobe. He named the spread. He said the words treatment and time and side effects. He said the word palliative like a soft shoe on a hard floor. Hank listened without moving much. His breathing made a narrow sound. When the doctor finished laying out the lines, Hank nodded once. No chemo, he said. The syllables made sense coming from him as if he had been waiting for the right sentence to say for months and found it ready. In the parking lot, the cold went right through our coats. We sat with the engine off. His hands lay open on his knees. He looked at them as if counting tendons. He did not look frightened. He looked like a man whose map had fewer roads than before and clearer ones. He turned his palm up and I set my hand in it. His thumb went over the back of my knuckles slow and sure. He said, I want days that feel like days. I said, all right. On the porch that evening, the cup rattled against the saucer when I set it down. A circle of coffee climbed and spilled. He smiled at the mess like it was proof something real had been poured. We did not speak in vows. We slept with the lamp on low and woke when the light turned silver at the edge of the curtains. We found the kind of quiet that does not eat you. Cannon Beach in a sideways rain tasted like salt and metal. The wind tilted us. We took turns holding the paper cup of chowder. He coughed after a spoonful and then shook his head and grinned, eyes watering from pepper and air. Gulls argued over a chip bag downshore. His pant legs took on dark at the knees where the spray found him. I pressed my glove to the damp spot and he pressed his glove over mine. We stood like that long enough to feel the heat creep back. On a weekday afternoon, we ate at a truck with a red canopy. The salsa was mean and bright. He laughed until he coughed, and then laughed again at the sound of himself. We sat on an upside-down crate and watched a boy in a yellow jacket learn to ride a skateboard, front foot tentative, back foot brave. Hank leaned forward as the boy gained a little smooth. That, he said. We walked a small museum with hallways the color of old postcards. He stopped before a black and white photograph of a ridge line with snow cut clean against sky. He leaned in and put his finger near the glass without touching. He said, that is the exact kind of cold that clears your head and makes you want to tell the truth. Nights were light and then less light. I read out loud a chapter or two from any book that reached my hand. He nodded along, even when his eyes closed. I put the book down when his breathing fell into a deep, steady pool. Sometimes he woke with a start and came back fast like a man who thought he had been left behind and realized he was not. Sundays kept their shape. We drove to the ridge in slow ceremony. The lot saw two people get out and become less separate. He walked with care and stopped at the boulder that looks like a sleeping dog. He rested his hand there each time like a passport stamp. Sometimes Taryn met us halfway up the path and matched her breathing to his as if she could lend a rhythm. He joked that her steps were quieter than pine needles. She laughed and said he needed new flattery. At the rail, he leaned with both hands and looked out as if he could make the horizon stay. He said very little those weeks. He said enough. He would take the cap and warm his fingers and give it back. He would tilt his head toward the trees and listen. He would say, remember the Sunday with the fog like milk? I would nod and answer, the jays hid in it and still scolded. He would smile and close his eyes, seeing it again. The last Sunday he wanted the ridge even when the air in the hallway felt like a hill. We moved slowly. The path had never been so steep. We paused where the frost held on in the shadows. He placed his palm on the wood and took the weight of it into his fingertips. I opened the thermos and the first curl of steam came up into our faces like breath returning to a body. The world lay bright and endless. He said, Haven is you. I said, I know. We stood with that until the cold went through to bone, and then we stood a little longer. After that day, the house made smaller sounds. The nurse bells were not needed. Taryn came during daylight and left notes on the counter with the time of the last dose and a small heart when he had eaten well. I learned the hose on the oxygen whistled a little when it kinked. I learned where his shoulder liked a hand when sleep wanted to slide away. I learned to count breaths without letting my face tell the count. He asked for music that did not get in the way. I found a station that played old guitar lines. He closed his eyes and let the notes walk across the room. I read Lila's letter again, the part about Haven being a person, not a pin on a screen. He did not open his eyes, but his mouth made the shape of yes. Jess and my son came one afternoon with a loaf still warm through the paper. Jess sat at the foot of the bed and told him about a plant in her kitchen that would not die, even when she forgot it for weeks. He said he knew the kind and smiled. My son stood a little to the side, hands in his pockets, and then moved closer and took Hank's hand. He said, "Thank you," plain and low. Hank squeezed once and let go. After they left, the room felt bigger, not emptier. The last night came as if it had been walking up the street and stopped at our door. The lamp made a small lake of gold on the wall. The machines were quiet. I lay beside him with my arm along his arm. His hand fit around my finger light. His eyes opened once and found mine. He said, "See you at the bend of the wind." The words were clear. He closed his eyes and his mouth softened. His breath thinned and spaced. In the space between two breaths there was another kind of quiet, and then it held. I stayed with him while the hour changed. The window held a gray that turned toward morning. Taryn came and put her hand on my shoulder and then on his wrist. She spoke to him in the same voice she had used all month. She straightened the sheet and left the room to make a call. I watched the ridge in my head and the way the light moved there. The funeral was in a room at the back of a small church with windows that looked at a parking lot and a stand of alder. Chairs scraped. The air had that mix of lilies and coffee you only find in church halls. Jess spoke first. She said her mother's name and Hank's name and set them next to each other without apology. My son spoke and took his time to breathe, and then the words came like they had been pulled up from deep. When it was my turn, I told them how I drove a car with the saved word, and how it led me to a man who knew where to stand when the air was thin. I did not look at the floor. I looked at the faces of the people who had come to hear his name one more time. After people touched my arm and put paper cups in my hand, and then took them away when I forgot to drink. Taryn hugged me with both arms and said nothing. Outside, the sky held a steady gray. The Camry sat where I had left it. The GPS glowed a quiet blue across the console. At home, the house had changed shape by a fraction you could feel without measuring. I set the thermos on the counter to dry and watched a bead of water slide down the steel. Someone knocked. Jess stood with a small envelope in both hands held like an offering. Her scarf was pulled tight at the throat. "He wrote this a while back," she said. "He gave it to me to hold. He said to wait until it was time to hand it over." She looked at my face and then at the space over my shoulder as if the room might answer for me. "Is now all right?" I opened the door wider. She stepped in and set the envelope on the table, careful as if the weight inside could break. The paper was thick and off-white. My name was on the front in a hand I knew well. She touched the corner once and took her hand back. She said, "I will call you tomorrow." She pulled me in and held me, and then left with her scarf tucked into her coat. I sat at the table with the envelope in my palm, and then under my palm. The ink had dented the paper a little where his pen pushed too hard on the H. I set it beside the thermos lid and watched them both shine a little in the afternoon light. The house made the sound of warm pipes settling. Outside, a car passed slow. The envelope waited. The room did not hurry me. The envelope waited where I left it. Afternoon light made a pale square on the table. The paper felt thick and dry under my thumb. His handwriting leaned forward as if it meant to meet me halfway. I slid a butter knife under the flap and lifted. Inside one page. He had written on both sides, the ink a steady blue. I heard him in the shape of the lines before I read a word. Nora, he wrote. Thank you for letting the days be days. Thank you for standing at the rail and not counting the minutes. When you drive up alone, there will be a place where the pines start whispering. That is where I always felt less alone first. If the air takes your breath for a moment, wait. It comes back. Do not stand still in the lot. Drive when it is time to drive. He named small things the way he did. The way the thermos lid sighs. The scrape in the board by the third post. The bird that scolds and then hides. He said the ridge would keep what we gave it and give back what it could. He wrote, you do not owe the past less love to keep the present. When it feels right, change the name on the screen. Haven becomes home when you decide it is. I will know. He signed it with the H that pressed hard into the paper. I set the letter back in its envelope and held both to my chest for a count. The room was quiet enough to hear the pipes breathe. On Sunday, I drove early. The highway gave me the old song in a clear line. The singer kept his promise without static. The check engine light stayed dark. At the pullout, a crow hopped along the gravel and looked at me like a clerk who had seen everything. The lot was empty. The air had an edge to it that cut the fog into long folds. I carried the thermos and 2 paper cups in one hand. At the rail, I set both cups side by side and poured to fill them halfway. Steam rose in 2 small streams and then drifted. I took mine and held the other. The ground at my feet was hard and cold. I tipped a little coffee from the second cup to the dirt. It darkened and smelled like morning. Hello, I said. The word went out and did not have to go far. I touched the rail where his hand had liked to rest. The wood remembered the shape. The pine smell was strong. The ridge lay open and clean. I said their names once and stood until the cold reached the bones in my feet. Then I put the empty cup in my coat pocket and walked back along the path. A jay flew up and landed again, still talking like it had something important to tell the trees. Days gathered. I washed one mug and left one to dry. I learned which hours the light found the corner of the table where the letter stayed. When the house went too quiet, I opened a window and let the street noise walk in. Sometimes it was a bus break. Sometimes it was a boy's shout. Sometimes it was nothing, and that was fine. Jess came by with a box the size of a dictionary. The cardboard had a post office stamp from another decade. We opened it at the counter. Inside lay an album bound in cracked green. We turned pages slowly. Polaroids stuck 2 to a page with corners that had yellowed. The ridge appeared again and again, Lila in a scarf with wind in it, Hank with an arm he did not know where to put, and a smile that did not hide. At the back, a single photo printed from a phone. 2 old faces tucked under the same sky. Jess touched that one with a fingertip, then pulled her hand back and closed the cover. The room smelled like old paper and mandarin peel. On a Thursday evening in the little meeting room off the library, the book club gathered in chairs that made a slight squeak. The ceiling was low. People brought tea and travel mugs and cookies on a plate wrapped in plastic. When it was my turn to share, I did not read names. I read about an address that was only a word and a road that went up. I read about a rail polished by use and a thermos that sighed. No one talked while I read. When I finished, a woman in a red sweater reached across and set her hand over mine. We sat like that for a breath. The cookies stayed on the plate. At home later, the blue square on the console still said Haven. I scrolled through the settings and found the gray pencil icon. In the field with the name, I put my finger and held it there. Then I typed steady as I could. Haven, my home. When I tapped, Save the Ping sounded like a small bell in a far room. The new name held on the screen. The car smelled faintly of the old perfume when the heat came on. Sundays kept coming. The ridge kept its weather. Some mornings the valley filled with a white that looked like milk. Some mornings the wind cut so clean my eyes watered and then cleared. I carried 2 cups and poured one and then poured some of it away. Sometimes someone else stood a few posts down and lifted a hand. I lifted mine back. We did not trade words. We shared the air. Jess and my son and my daughter walked up with me once. We took the path without talking much. At the rail, I handed them the thermos and the cups. We stood in a line without planning it. Jess took out the album and showed them the last photo. My son looked at it for a long time. He did not wipe his face. He let it be. We drove back down in 2 cars. At a light, he rolled his window down and smiled across at me, both hands on the wheel. When the house needed a new sound, I found one. On a table by the front door, the GPS sat on its little dock. Its screen showed 2 favorites: Haven, Home, and another pin that was not a ridge and not a room. A small studio with tall windows a few blocks from the river. The name under it was simple. It said Light. On a blue Sunday, I parked at the lot and turned the radio off so the wind could have the first word. I poured 2 cups and set one next to the post where the grain had raised. The ridge lay out under a sky that could hold anything. The phone in my pocket buzzed once. A message waited short and plain. Want company next Sunday up there? I looked at the path. I looked at the cup on the rail. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and picked up my cup. Wind moved through the pines with a sound like someone answering. The GPS screen in the car held its new name. I stood and breathed until the cold edged out and the warmth edged in. Then I turned and walked the path toward the lot, the thermos warm against my side. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.